to you today. Another Insight to the End Times podcast. We are looking at the spirit of the Antichrist. Now, the Insight to the End Times deals with biblical verses, scriptures, prophetic verses, to point out where we are in God's timetable, because whether we know it or not, we're at the end of God's timetable. Genesis talks about 6 days of creation and 1 day of rest. The Apostle Peter, in his book that he wrote, he said, 2 Peter, he said, a day with the Lord is equal to 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is equal to a day. So when we do the extension of that principle, 6,000 years of activity on earth, 1,000 years of rest. That 1,000-year period is known as the millennial reign of Jesus Christ, where he will rule and reign over the entire earth, and the earth will be at peace. We're coming close to the end of the 6,000-year sequence or time period, the 6 days. We don't exactly know when that occurs, other than this. Once the tribulation period begins, we know there's exactly 7 years. In fact, it refers to 1,260 days in the first half, 1,260 days in the second half, which is very close to exactly 7 years on our calendar. So once that begins, we know 7 years after it begins, we have the Battle of Armageddon, we have the complete victory by Jesus Christ, and he sets up his millennial kingdom to rule for 1,000 years. But when it begins is the question. We don't know exactly when it occurs, but there are so many scriptures we've been examining over the last year and a half that point out when we're getting closer and closer and closer. In fact, Jesus said, when you see the fig tree put out its branches, you better look up because your redemption draws nigh. And the fig tree is a symbol of the nation of Israel, which until 1948 had not existed for 2,500 years. But in 1948, in the month of May, it was given its citizenship again, or its status as a country. It's fought for its freedom all these years, and things are getting very intense there now. So we know that we're very, very close. Today, I want to talk about the good old days for a few minutes, and then I want to talk about what's going on in the world today. We got to get all of this in the next 6 minutes. But I started off public school, as we would call it, grade school, elementary school, when the biggest problem of the day was getting caught chewing gum. And oh my goodness, what a problem that was. You got possibly expelled for that day or suspended for that day. You certainly got, you were penalized. Oh my goodness, you were chewing gum. Wow. You know what else you had to do? You had to actually study, and you had to pass exams and tests. You had to get a passing grade. And you didn't get to go to the next level, to the next grade, unless you did. So some kids got to spend 2 or 3 years in grade 1 or grade 2 or grade 3. In fact, I had a great uncle. He was a funny guy. He was Uncle Bob. And Uncle Bob, I asked him one time when I was just a little kid, I said, what were your 3 favorite grades in public school? And Uncle Bob said, grade 3. And I looked at him and I said, yeah, but what were your 3 favorite? He said, grade 3. I said, what do you mean? He said, I got to do it 3 times. Why? Because he didn't pass. Those were the good old days, amen. What about this? Boys were boys and girls were girls. And we had a boys' washroom and they had a girls' washroom. And there was no confusion. The good old days. Well, guess what? Things have changed. Once we moved into the 21st century, things really started to snowball. Things began to change very, very quickly. You could look at the development of the computer. You could look at the fact that everything got downloaded onto the computer, everything's stored on the computer, everything is directed by the computer, everything's controlled by the computer. That's how our life began to change drastically and dramatically. But we saw things come on the scene that we'd never seen before, and I want to just highlight a couple things for you. And then I'm going to read you an article out of the newspaper. And I want to suggest to you that when the pandemic hit, the COVID-19 pandemic in March of 2020, we were shut down across the world. We were shut down certainly extensively in North America, in both U.S. and Canada, extremely strong shutdown mandates. And as a result, we were not allowed to gather. We were basically marooned in our homes. Our churches were not allowed to operate. Our businesses were basically closed down. Our schools were closed down. If you owned shares in Zoom, you became very, very rich very quickly, as well as other software programs of that nature, because things changed so drastically. And I would suggest to you that we saw an acceleration of things which really took off during that period and haven't slowed down. And it really got into the wrong hands, if you want me to really be accurate with you. We saw things like the woke movement come up. I still don't know how to define that. We saw what we call the D.E.I movement, the diversity, the equality or equalization, and the inclusivity doctrine come along. We saw all kinds of different things come on the scene that changed the way life is lived. And we saw it hit all kinds of areas, especially our schooling, our education systems, our university systems, our government, our job hiring. You haven't got a chance today, it seems, in at least our nation, to be hired if you happen to be white and you happen to be a male. It doesn't matter how qualified you are. You're just not going to get hired because these new rules came into effect, which one expert said, what happened to common sense? Where'd it go? But I wanted to read an article to you as it pertains to the schooling system. Hope you'll let me do this. It comes out of the National Post. It was an article I read on June the 23rd. And here's what it is. A 13-year-old girl questioned a classmate's identity as a cat, only to be upbraided by the teacher. Now, already this sounds weird. How dare you? You've just really upset someone, said the Church of England school teacher. When the girl said there were only two genders, male and female, the teacher suggested she was homophobic and said she should go to another school. I'm reporting you to a senior teacher. You need to have a proper educational conversation about inclusion, about equality, and about diversity, because I'm not having that expressed in my lesson. Who expressed common sense in this situation? The girl expressed concern that the other girl said she was a cat. This is a bizarre world where safe and private means exactly the opposite to different people. Gender-neutral washrooms are appearing in Toronto, and they are appearing to be both safe and private according to the education officials. Gender-neutral washrooms are safe and private according to the officials, but not from the parental point of view. The parents are being left out of those conversations. Well, it just goes on and on and on to show you that something weird has happened in our society. I want to suggest to you it's the spirit of the Antichrist. Why? Because it's demonic. It is contrary to everything we know from our Judeo-Christian backgrounds. Like we're uprooting everything in our country because of these new movements. Are these progressive or regressive? I think we could all answer that question. And it's pitting families against each other and peoples against each other and ideologies against each other, and things are just absolutely upside down. Well, that's the spirit that we're talking about. It's what the Antichrist is all about. He wants to have complete control, and he wants to control the way you think and the way you believe. And I, for one, am not in favor of that, and neither is the Bible. I'll see you tomorrow. We're going to shift gears tomorrow. We're going to have a good time. See you then. Call you blessed. Amen.